Imagine everything you've ever been taught about how your body works, how it grows, how it heals, is just missing this massive invisible middle layer.
Right, like a huge piece of the puzzle is just gone.
Exactly. Because, we all know the standard story, right? Genetics is the foundational blueprint. It's the hard code of who we are.
The absolute master instruction manual, yeah.
Right. And then you've got neuroscience, the brain, and, well, that's how we think, how we process the world.
Mm-hmm.
But what if your individual cells are actually thinking? Like, making complex geometric decisions and communicating on this massive scale long before a brain even exists to tell them what to do.
It completely flips the script.
It really does.
Right.
So, okay, let's unpack this because this deep dive is doing something a little different today. We are officially launching a brand new channel called Innovation Toronto The Edge.
Very exciting.
It is. And to set the tone for the kind of boundaries we want to push on this channel, we're diving into a text titled The Bioelectric Blueprint, Basal Cognition, and the Cellular Mind. We are exploring an idea that, honestly, it doesn't just add a footnote to biology, it rewrites the entire operating system of life.
It forces a complete reevaluation of how life organizes itself.
Mm.
I mean, to capture the sheer scale of what we are dealing with today, I've actually had the studio backdrop behind me set to alternate between two very specific kinds of imagery.
Yeah, I've been watching it change. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, so on one side, we have these incredibly dense microscopic networks of cellular structures, tissues, membranes, proteins. And then on the other side, it switches to these vast, sweeping, interconnected webs of galactic star charts.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And visually, if you look at them, they look remarkably similar. And functionally, that similarity points to a universe of communication happening right inside you. It's this hidden network that choreographs the shape of life before a single neuron is ever even formed.
I love that visual connection. It really grounds the scale of this for you, the listener. So let's start with the gap in our current understanding. The source text makes this really compelling case that for the last century, biology has relied almost exclusively on two primary maps.
Right, genetics and neuroscience.
Exactly. You have the map of genetics, which is treated as the ultimate hardware, the unchangeable source code. And then way on the other end of the spectrum, you have neuroscience, the electrical symphony of the brain that governs behavior.
And there's this huge void in the middle.
Yes. The gap is what sits between them, a realm called basal cognition. And, reading through the history of how we got here, it's really clear why genetics dominated the conversation for so long.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes back to the discovery of the double helix in the 1950s. And then the monumental effort of the Human Genome Project in the 90s and early 2000s.
Right. That was huge news everywhere.
Yeah, it was everything. The scientific community essentially placed a massive bet on DNA. The assumption was, hey, if we could just map every single gene, we would have the absolute master instruction manual for human life.
Like we'd have it all figured out.
Exactly. We thought we could cure every disease, understand every physical trait, just simply by reading the genetic code. But as the text points out, the reality turned out to be far, far more complicated.
Because it's not the whole story.
No, not at all. Knowing the DNA sequence is like knowing the exact inventory of materials delivered to a construction site.
Yeah.
You have 10,000 bricks, 100 wooden beams, 50 windows.
But a pile of bricks doesn't spontaneously assemble into a house.
Right.
And that's exactly where I found myself pushing back against the traditional view I was taught in high school.
Mm-hmm.
We're taught that cells are essentially just diligent construction workers, blindly reading the genetic blueprint.
Just following orders.
Yeah, but if you think about the actual physical logistics of that, how do they know when a job is done? Like if I'm a generic skin cell and my DNA says build a hand, how do I know my specific coordinates? How do I know when I've collaborated with millions of other cells to build exactly 5 fingers? And crucially, how do I know that it's time to stop growing? Because a blueprint sitting on a table is static.
You need a project manager.
Exactly. You need a project manager on the ground, measuring the work, communicating with the specialized trades, making dynamic decisions.
What's fascinating here is that you're touching on what developmental biologists call target morphology.
Target morphology. Okay.
Yeah, it's the ability of a biological system to dynamically seek a specific geometric shape, and this is key, stop when it gets there.
Right, because otherwise we just keep growing fingers forever.
Exactly. And the limitation of the pure genetic model is that DNA does not contain a literal picture of a hand. There is no single gene for 5 fingers.
Wait, really? There's no finger gene?
No. DNA codes for proteins. That's it. It codes for the micro-level building blocks. It does not explain how millions of individual microscopic entities cooperate in real time to form a macro-level structure, or, how they correct course if an embryo is damaged during development.
Because that requires spatial awareness.
Exactly. It requires a level of collective intelligence.
Wow. Okay, I want you, the listener, to do something for a second. Just look down at your own hands while you're listening to this. Think about the billions of individual cells making up your fingers, your nail beds, the skin, the bone.
It's mind-boggling.
It is. When those hands were forming in the womb, your brain wasn't wired up yet. There were no nerves sending commands from a central computer saying, okay, elongate the index finger now.
Right, the brain is late to the party.
Exactly. The cells themselves had to collectively decide to form that highly functional shape.
And to make that collective decision, they needed a communication network. Which brings us to the mechanism of this cellular mind and introduces the pioneering work of researchers like Dr. Michael Levin at Tufts University.
Yes, the Levin lab.
Yeah. What Levin's lab has demonstrated is that somatic cells, which simply means all the non-neural cells in your body, like your skin, liver, bone, and muscle cells, they're using slow bioelectric signals to communicate on a body-wide scale.
Okay, let's pause and define bioelectric carefully, because when I hear that word, my mind immediately jumps to neuroscience.
Sure.
The brain is electrical, neurons fire, synapses spark. That's the really fast electricity that lets me instantly pull my hand away from a hot stove. How is this cellular bioelectricity different from what the brain is doing?
It's a difference of both speed and mechanism. So the brain relies on what are called action potentials. These are rapid-fire electrical spikes that travel down a nerve fiber in milliseconds.
Right, super fast.
Right, it's an evolutionary specialization for high-speed communication. But somatic cells use a much older, much slower system. Every single cell in your body has a membrane, and that membrane acts kind of like a battery.
Like a literal battery.
Yeah, literally. By pumping charged ions like potassium, sodium, calcium in and out of the cell maintains a specific electrical voltage across its surface. This is called the resting membrane potential.
So the cell itself holds a physical electrical charge.
Yes, but they don't hold it in isolation. That's the crucial part. Cells connect to each other through these tiny physical tunnels called gap junctions.
Gap junctions, okay.
Yeah, and these tunnels allow ions to flow directly from the inside of one cell to the inside of its neighbor. This creates a continuous body-wide electrical network.
Oh, wow.
And instead of rapid spikes, this network uses slow shifting gradients of voltage. The cells are constantly reading the electrical state of their neighbors, sharing information across space and time to make collective decisions about growth and form.
Okay, so they're passing charged particles back and forth through these little tunnels to establish a sort of bioelectric topography.
Exactly.
But here is where the text challenges us and where I really want to push on the terminology. The researchers call this basal cognition. They refer to it as a thinking network. Are they suggesting a liver cell is literally thinking? Because, the word cognition implies a level of processing, memory, and decision-making that we normally reserve exclusively for brains. Is this just scientists using a poetic metaphor for a complex chemical gradient?
Well, it's not a metaphor, but it does require us to strip away our human-centric bias regarding what thinking actually looks like.
Okay, fair.
If we define cognition not as, writing a symphony or doing advanced calculus, but purely as the ability to take in information from the environment, process it, store it as memory, and then use that memory to make adaptive decisions to solve a problem, then yes, these cellular networks are exhibiting rigorous cognitive behavior.
They're solving the problem of how to build a body.
Exactly. They're solving a massive computational problem, which is the geometry of anatomy.
So you're saying the definition of intelligence shouldn't be tied to the existence of a neuron?
Exactly. Neurons didn't invent bioelectricity. They just optimized it for speed. The text argues that intelligence started with the very first single-celled organisms billions of years ago.
Right.
The moment a cell formed a boundary between itself and the outside world, it had to start monitoring its environment and making decisions just to survive.
It had to figure out what was food and what was danger.
Precisely. And over time, cells realized that by networking together and sharing their bioelectric states, they can process far more information and tackle much larger goals.
Like building a complex body.
Right. The brain is just a highly specialized, very fast version of a process that every cell in your body has been doing since the dawn of life.
That reframes the entire timeline of evolution. Intelligence didn't start with the brain, it started with the spark of life itself.
It really did.
But, theory is one thing. Actually proving that cells possess a decentralized memory that overrides genetic default settings that requires hard evidence.
Oh, and the evidence is incredible.
It is. And to provide that, the source text takes us to an experiment that, frankly, sounds like it belongs in a sci-fi horror movie, but it is entirely real. We need to talk about the Planarian flatworm.
Yes. The Planarian flatworm is perhaps the most important animal in the study of basal cognition. To understand why Dr. Levin's experiments are so disruptive, we really have to understand just how robust this animal's biology actually is.
Let's lay out exactly what this worm can do, because the text describes it as a master regenerator. Now, humans have a tiny bit of regenerative ability, like our livers can regenerate to an extent, our skin heals.
Right, salamanders can regrow limbs.
Right, but the Planarian flatworm operates on a completely different level of physics. You can take this worm, which has a head, a brain, a nervous system, and a tail, and you can cut it into tiny pieces. And every single isolated piece will flawlessly regrow into a perfect, complete worm.
To put a number on it, historical experiments have shown you can cut a planarian into 279 individual pieces.
Wait, 279?
279. And you don't get 279 dead fragments. You get 279 fully functional, complete worms.
That is just insane.
Each one regenerating the exact missing anatomy required to become whole again. And for roughly a century, the scientific consensus was that this was purely a mechanical genetic process.
Just DNA doing its thing.
Exactly. The assumption was that the DNA inside every cell acts like a hard drive containing the complete blueprint. When a piece is amputated, the physical trauma triggers a generic rebuild program that's just encoded in the DNA.
Right, so the assumption was that the DNA was just running its default software program. It knows it's a worm, so it builds a worm.
Exactly.
But Levin's team asked a fundamentally different question. They wanted to know if the memory of what the worm was supposed to look like, its target morphology, was actually stored in the DNA, or if it was stored in that invisible, slow bioelectric network we just described.
Right.
So they designed an experiment to decouple the two.
And the methodology of how they did this is crucial, because they didn't invent some magical new technology. They used standard pharmaceutical drugs.
Like what kind of drugs?
Things like common heart or seizure medications. These drugs work by targeting those specific ion channels we mentioned earlier. By applying these drugs to a planarian fragment, Levin's team could force certain ion channels to open and others to close.
Okay, so they weren't like sending electrical shocks into the worm with electrodes.
No shocks.
They were just chemically locking and unlocking the little trap doors on the cell membranes to change how the ions flowed.
Precisely. They altered the voltage gradient, the bioelectric field of that specific tissue fragment. And here's the most important fact of this entire deep dive. They did not alter the worm's DNA.
Not a single gene.
Not one. The genetic code of that fragment remained 100% identical to a normal, wild flatworm. All they did was change the electrical conversation happening between the cells. They essentially rewrote the tissue's conceptual memory of what it was supposed to build.
And the result of that subtle electrical manipulation is what just completely shatters the old biological map. Because when that electrically modified fragment was allowed to regenerate, it didn't grow into a normal worm.
No, it didn't.
It flawlessly regenerated into a worm with two heads, one on each end.
One on each end. And again, just to reiterate, the DNA was completely untouched.
I really need to sit with the mechanics of this for a second. The genetic hardware was identical to a normal single-headed worm.
Yep.
If DNA is the ultimate master blueprint, as we've all been taught, it should have built a single-headed worm. But the bioelectric software, the communication network between the cells, had been fed a new target shape.
Right.
The cells held a specific memory in their electrical field, and when they started multiplying and building, they built to that electrical vision, not the genetic one.
That's exactly it.
It's like, imagine an automobile factory. This factory's been running for decades, producing only sedans.
Okay.
The raw materials coming in are for sedans, the robots on the floor built to assemble sedans, the physical infrastructure is totally locked in, but then somebody hacks into the factory's Wi-Fi network.
The invisible communication layer.
Exactly, the layer coordinating the robots. They don't change the robots themselves, they don't change the sheet metal, but suddenly the exact same robots, using the exact same metal, start collaborating to build a submarine.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the hierarchy of control here.
Yeah.
The cells are the robots, and the DNA dictates the raw materials available to proteins. But the bioelectric field is the Wi-Fi network. It's the project manager that dictates the final assembly.
Right.
But to make your factory analogy even more accurate based on the science, we have to look at how they hacked the Wi-Fi.
Okay.
They didn't use a keyboard to type in a new code. As we discussed, they used ion channel blockers. It's as if they walked into your factory and strategically jammed a few key trapdoors on the router system, forcing the Wi-Fi signals to bounce around in a completely new pattern.
Okay.
And that new pattern formed the bioelectric memory of a second head.
And the most staggering part of the source material isn't just that they built a two-headed worm once, it's what happens next. The text notes that if you take that two-headed worm and you amputate both of its heads, right? So you just have a middle fragment again, and you let it sit in plain water with no further drugs, no further electrical manipulation, it will continue to grow into a two-headed worm.
This is where traditional genetics really struggles the most. The altered bioelectric state is remarkably stable. It acts as an epigenetic memory.
Meaning the cells remember it?
Yes. The cellular collective remembers the new target shape and passes that electrical memory down to the newly generated cells. It proves that biological form is not strictly hard-coded into the genome. It is a dynamic software layer that can be overwritten and stored in the bioelectric field.
Which naturally forces us into the philosophical implications of all this, because once you establish that the memory of a physical shape is stored in an electrical field, and once you prove that cells are constantly communicating to solve complex geometric problems, you trigger a massive paradigm shift in how we view life itself. The text moves from the mechanics of the flatworm into this deeply reflective concept of the cellular collective.
It's an unavoidable leap, really, because the research didn't stop with flatworms in the early 2000s. The text outlines how, moving into 2024 and 2025, scientists have documented extensive problem-solving behaviors in single-celled organisms.
Single-celled. So no nervous system at all?
Absolutely none. Organisms like the slime mold Physarum polycephalum or the single-celled Scentorocelii. They have no brain, yet they can navigate complex mazes, they can learn to anticipate feeding schedules, and they can actually alter their behavior based on past experiences.
That is wild.
It is. Dr. Levin uses this to describe bioelectric networks as literal cognitive glue.
Cognitive glue?
Yes. It is the invisible force that binds individual, highly competent cellular agents into a singular thinking organism with macro-level goals.
You know, I read that phrase, cognitive glue, and I genuinely had to stop reading for a minute. If cognition, intelligence, and memory are ground-up properties, if they start at the level of the individual cell and scale up through this electrical glue, then the very definition of self completely expands.
It shatters the old definition.
It really does. I look in the mirror, and my whole life I've assumed that the I speaking to you right now is a centralized ghost in the machine, localized entirely in my skull.
Right. That's what we all feel.
But this research suggests I am actually a walking, talking hive mind. I am a collective of trillions of individual intelligent agents that have temporarily agreed to be bound together by electrical intent to form the shape of a human.
It strips away the illusion of pure top-down control. We have a very mechanistic industrial view of the human body. We think it's a dumb machine exclusively piloted by a master controller brain sitting in the cockpit.
Exactly.
But the reality is that you are a deeply distributed network. The mind was here all along. Your liver cells are communicating to maintain the boundary of your liver. Your skin cells are constantly negotiating to maintain the integrity of your surface.
They're all working together.
Yeah, they have a collective goal, which is keeping you alive and maintaining your physical form against the forces of entropy.
Let's ground that in a real-world experience for the listener. Think about a time you had a relatively severe physical injury, maybe a deep laceration on your arm, or a bad burn.
Ouch, yeah.
Think about the healing process over the next few weeks. You, the conscious entity listening to this deep dive right now, you didn't think about healing.
Not at all.
Your brain had absolutely no conscious idea how to knit severed blood vessels back together, or how to generate new dermis, or how to properly sequence the inflammatory response. You probably just cleaned it, put a bandage on it, and went to work.
You just ignored it, basically.
Right, but underneath that bandage, your cellular collective rallied. They communicated, they shared a bioelectric memory of what your uninjured skin was supposed to look like, and they went to work reburning it. And critically, they knew exactly when to stop growing once the skin was smooth again.
That's the target morphology in action.
Your body is a genius, entirely independent of your conscious mind.
That's a really beautiful way to frame it. The body possesses a deep basal intelligence. And the implications of recognizing that intelligence, of finally seeing this hidden map of basal cognition, are going to completely revolutionize the future of medicine.
This is the really exciting part.
It is. The source text makes a very bold claim. The next era of medical breakthroughs won't just be about micromanaging genes or aggressively destroying diseased tissue. It will be about learning the subtle language of bioelectricity so that we can speak directly to the cellular collective.
Right. It shifts the focus from editing the hardware to communicating with the software. The text outlines 3 massive, real-world applications of this, and I want to explore the mechanics of each. The first is true regenerative medicine.
Currently, human regenerative medicine is quite limited. We rely heavily on stem cell therapies, where the approach is largely bottom-up.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning, we try to inject stem cells and coax them with specific chemical cocktails into becoming bone or cartilage. It's incredibly difficult because we're trying to micromanage the individual workers. But if we can learn the bioelectric language, the approach becomes top-down.
We wouldn't be telling the cells how to build the arm, we'd just be giving them the target morphology.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Levin's lab has already demonstrated this in frogs.
Oh, right, the frog experiment.
Yeah. Frogs, unlike salamanders, normally lose their ability to regenerate limbs as adults. If a frog loses a leg, it just forms a stump.
Okay.
But the researchers created a wearable device called a biodome. It contained a specific cocktail of drugs, including progesterone, that altered the bioelectric state of the cells at the wound site.
Just altering the communication.
Yeah, exactly. They essentially turned on the bioelectric software program for Build a Leg. And here's the crazy part. They exposed the wound to this signal for just 24 hours.
Just a single day.
Just one day. And over the next 18 months, the frog regrew a functional leg, complete with toes and bone structure. The 24-hour bioelectric signal triggered a massive cascade of cellular cooperation that the cells inherently knew how to execute.
That is staggering. A 24-hour signal that acts as a catalyst for 18 months of complex geometric growth. It completely bypasses the need to micromanage the genetics.
It's a total game changer.
The second medical application mentioned in the text might be even more impactful for humans in the near term, which is a radical new approach to reprogramming cancer cells. And this is where the paradigm shift hits hardest against traditional medicine, I think.
It does, because traditionally, oncology views cancer primarily as a genetic disease. The dogma is that random genetic mutations occur, which cause the cell to lose its growth control mechanisms, leading to unchecked multiplication.
Right, it's a broken machine.
That's the view, yeah. Because the cell is genetically broken, our response has always been aggressive warfare. We use chemotherapy to poison it, radiation to burn it out, or surgery to just cut it out.
But the bioelectric perspective completely reframes what a tumor actually is. It's not just a genetic error, it's a communication breakdown.
Exactly. Through the lens of basal cognition, cancer is viewed as a geometry problem. Researchers observe that before a cell becomes a tumor, its bioelectric signature changes drastically. It depolarizes.
Meaning it loses its charge.
Yes. And essentially closes off those gap junctions, the communication tunnels we talked about earlier. It physically disconnects from the bioelectric grid of the body.
Wow.
Once it stops listening to the cognitive glue that tells it to be part of a liver or part of a lung, the cell just forgets the collective shape of the body. It reverts to its ancient, default, single-cell state. And the only goal of a single, isolated cell is to multiply.
So the cancer cell isn't necessarily an invading enemy, it's a cell that has suffered profound amnesia because it got unplugged from the network.
That's a perfect way to put it.
If that is true, then the solution isn't necessarily to kill it.
No, the solution is to plug it back in.
Plug it back in.
Yeah, and this isn't just theory. In laboratory models, researchers have taken human oncogenes, these are genes known to cause cancer, and injected them into frog embryos. As expected, tumors began to form.
Okay.
But then, researchers used specific drugs to force the ion channels of those cancer cells to open back up, forcibly repolarizing them and reconnecting them to the bioelectric network of the surrounding healthy tissue.
And what happened?
When they did this, the cells stopped multiplying out of control. They normalized. They remembered they were supposed to be part of a frog, and they integrated back into healthy tissue, despite still carrying the cancer-causing genetic mutation.
Wait. They still had the mutated DNA, but they stopped acting like cancer just because the electrical communication was restored.
Precisely. The bioelectric software overrode the defective genetic hardware.
That is unbelievable.
It means the future of oncology might involve using ion channel modulating drugs,
Yeah.
and by the way, some of which are already FDA approved for other conditions to gently reprogram rogue cells back into cooperative tissue. It's a complete shift from molecular warfare to cellular communication.
I am so struck by the elegance of that, reminding the cells of the master plan instead of just nuking the body.
It is a much more peaceful approach to medicine.
It really is. And that leads to the third and perhaps most sci-fi application discussed in the source material, which is synthetic organisms. If we understand how bioelectric software dictates physical form, we aren't limited to the forms that evolution has blindly stumbled into over billions of years.
This is where we step into the realm of creation. By writing new bioelectric software, scientists have already begun designing entirely new life forms from the ground up.
You're talking about the Xenobots.
Yes, the Xenobots. These are made entirely from normal, unmodified frog skin and heart cells. Left to their own devices, these cells would just form a flat layer of tissue in a petri dish.
Right.
But using an AI supercomputer, researchers calculated a specific bioelectric target shape and then sculpted the cells to match it. The result is a microscopic biological robot that doesn't exist anywhere in nature.
And these Xenobots can actually do things, right? They aren't just inert clumps of meat sitting there.
Oh, they are highly active. They can swim through fluid, they can push microscopic payloads, they can spontaneously work together in swarms to gather loose material.
Wow.
And they can even self-heal if you cut them open. They have no brain, no nervous system, and their DNA is just standard frog DNA. But their bioelectric programming allows them to function as an entirely new, functioning organism.
The practical applications for that are just mind-boggling. We could create swarms of biological robots designed to safely patrol the human bloodstream, maybe scraping plaque out of arteries or delivering highly targeted medication to a specific organ, and then simply dissolving away as biodegradable tissue when the job is done.
That's exactly the vision.
But it also presents a massive shift in human capability. We're talking about becoming bioelectric software engineers. When we start hacking the Wi-Fi of the cellular collective, when we start redefining the target shape of living tissue, we're essentially taking the steering wheel of life's operating system.
It is a profound capability. And it forces us to confront the reality that biological form is highly plastic. It is not a fixed destiny written in our genes. It is a dynamic, continuously negotiated process. And as we map the vocabulary of this slow electrical language, we are gaining the ability to participate in that negotiation.
It is an awe-inspiring responsibility. And, as we wrap up this inaugural deep dive for Innovation Toronto The Edge, I just want to summarize the incredible territory we've covered today.
We've covered a lot.
We really have. We started by looking at a map of biology that was missing its entire middle layer. We discovered that between the hard-coded genetics and the fast electricity of neuroscience, there is a slow, simmering thinking network of basal cognition.
The cellular mind.
Exactly. We looked at the awe-inspiring Planarian flatworm, a creature whose bioelectric memory can be rewritten to literally build a two-headed animal without altering a single letter of its DNA.
Still blows my mind.
Same. We explored the mechanics of ion channels and gap junctions, and we absorbed the realization that we are not just a centralized machine, but a beautiful, bioelectrically bound collective of trillions of intelligent cellular agents.
Realizing that changes how you view yourself. It changes how you view the deeply ingrained intelligence of your own body and how you view the vast potential of future medicine. The mind didn't just arrive with the brain. It was here all along, waiting for us to learn its language.
It really was. And as we leave you today, I want to give you one final lingering thought to mull over, just something to let echo in your mind. If the physical shape of an organism, if the very memory of a healthy organ is stored in a dynamic bioelectric field, rather than being strictly hard-coded in the DNA, could we one day extract or save a bioelectric backup of a human organ's perfect state? Think about it. If the shape is essentially just software, could the bioelectric memory of your body's perfect form actually outlive the physical cells themselves? Could we one day back up the bioelectric blueprint of who you are? Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible exploration of the mind before the brain. Keep looking closely at the world, stay intensely curious, and keep seeking the edge of innovation.